Okay, I'm back again. After a few attempts here, YouTube only allows you to load up a 10-minute video, and I had a few that were slightly over, so I'm going to keep this definitely within 10. This is my daughter Sophia. She's accompanying me for this particular discussion on Socrates, Plato's Meno. So real briefly, the difference between Socrates and Plato should probably be laid out. Many of you may know this, but Socrates, of course, was the teacher of Plato. He never wrote anything down. Plato recorded some of his dialogues. What's the difference between Socrates and Plato? Some of Plato's later stuff, especially, is considered Plato's Platonic thought, especially the Republic, his real famous work. Whereas some of these earlier dialogues like this are frequently associated with a lot of Socratic thought. So the discussion I want to will follow the two PowerPoints I gave. First, I want to say a few things about the order of logic, and then I'll discuss the three themes that are in the second PowerPoint I loaded up on Labor Day. Okay, so the order of logic. What's great about this dialogue is it begins with questions, as all of a lot of Plato's dialogues do, and they pursue these questions. But right away, even though the questions come from Meno to the teacher Socrates, Socrates right away has turned it around so that he's questioning the student, and we find out right away that a couple things about Meno and Socrates. In fact, Socrates is after absolute truths, not these relativist, particularist points. So the first number of pages essentially is going through that. One thing that Meno's teacher Gorsha is a sophist, and the sophists were relativists. First of all, they took money, which was very different than Socrates, who didn't take money for his teaching. Second, they're relativists. They believed that truth was relative to individuals and cultural contexts. And lastly, the thing that Socrates objected to them was that they were after rhetoric. They wanted to attract students who and to teach them about saying things beautiful, but maybe not necessarily things that were true. And for him, truth was always anchored in reason. So thus he's constantly questioning. The unexamined life is not worth living was very true for Socrates. He dies because he is unable to teach this method of questioning and continuing questioning himself, so he drinks poison. He's an iconic teacher. The order of logic, though, in the first two-fifths of it is Socrates essentially breaking Meno down, deconstructing his position, challenging the premises of his statements, what they're based on, and by the end of it, Meno himself is quite flummoxed, and he throws his arms up and gives up, essentially. And of course, he calls Socrates the torpedo fish, someone who torpifies people, sort of discombobulates people, which is really opposite he understood to be what education was about. But this is, in fact, the very thing of what Socrates understands education to be. Education is to pose questions to the status quo and to help us move away from the status quo to abstract, theoretical positions, the world of ideals, the world of forms, as in the Platonic world. So in the second half of the order of the logic, this is where actually after Socrates breaks Meno down, he begins to build his arguments. And he begins with the famous example of the slave boy. And not to get lost in this 3 pages of what he's after, but he's essentially trying to prove that knowledge is innate to students. And that's a position that a lot of people still hold today, that education should be about asking the right questions and helping students to pursue, in part, what they already have, which is this hunger to learn, to awaken that. And Socrates does this. In the last half of it, he puts together his position, which isn't as clear, okay, as perhaps a definition, but he's after a broader understanding and a truth that is absolute. I want to now go to the PowerPoint and the 3 themes, and this will finish up this commentary, I guess, on Plato's Meno. The 3 themes here that I focus on that PowerPoint are: 1 is the Socratic method, 2, this question of virtue and what he concludes with, and lastly, his epistemology. So real briefly, the Socratic method you see pervades this, and that the method itself is something that a lot of educators will use, and that is to question, to help students, when students ask questions of you, rather than give them the answer like a standards-based education may focus on. It is rather to help to give them questions, and those questions will lead to further questions, and the questions will drive the pursuit of truth towards a deeper understanding, and really towards more abstract understanding. So the Socratic method you see here at work, and the second theme I want to talk about is the question of virtue. What does actually Socrates conclude about virtue? These great questions to begin with. He returns to after he's sort of deconstructed Meno, and then he answers them. Perhaps not satisfactory to a lot of us, but he does. Virtue, he believes, isn't teachable in this dialogue because of the father-son analogy. I don't want to go into that, but for those that read it, you know what I'm talking about. But he does equate virtue with wisdom, and later he equates, he upholds people of right opinion, which is different than knowledge. Knowledge and virtue, which is like wisdom, which is right opinion. There's a difference between right opinion and knowledge. Knowledge is anchored in reason, whereas virtue and wisdom aren't quite anchored in reason, because if they were, we could teach them. And he uses the analogy at the end, and perhaps some people don't like it, but he talks about that this is a gift from the gods, essentially equating it with poetry, people that are great poets or statesmen. And if you think about it, people that are, everybody can write poetry and work hard at poetry, but few of us are great poets. Just the same thing with virtue. So we can work hard at being virtuous, but some of us seem to be just naturally virtuous. The last theme I want to hit is epistemology. And just briefly, there's a real difference between the sophist relativism and Socrates' absolutism. He is after truths that are absolute in every context, and that can be sort of indisputable. And I want to conclude by saying that sort of seems to a little bit foreign to us, but if you think about Bloom's taxonomy, and you think about where higher levels of knowledge are biased towards, it's very Platonic in its hierarchy. At the bottom you have facts, and at the top you have analysis and evaluation, which are these higher ordered level of thinking, which equates to sort of Plato's theoretical, abstract bias. All right, that's it. Have a great week. I look forward to getting your papers, and happy Labor Day to y'all.